Hi, this lecture is over process addictions part 1. Process and behavioral addictions are actually very similar to substance addictions in many ways. The first includes that they are also compulsive and obsessive in nature. These are behaviors that are typically used as maladaptive coping in order to alleviate pain. Similarly to chemical addictions, provide a short-term gratification for a long-term harm. Learning about the different types of process addictions is also important when studying addictions because we need to understand the different types and characteristics because they can often co-occur with chemical addictions. The different types of process addictions include eating disorders. This can be anorexia nervosa, bulimia, binge eating disorder, or other additional patterns of disordered eating like purging or restriction of food. Also, it can include maladaptive thinking like body dysmorphia, using drugs to reduce appetite, to lose weight, or excessive exercise. Another one that's not often thought of is shopping addiction. This is when individuals use spending money to cope with their problems, things that they don't want or need, but they gain a sense of euphoria from shopping. Similar effects are also elicited when somebody has an addiction to shoplifting. Sex or pornography is another process addiction. There are various types of sexual behaviors that are illegal. There are various types of sexual addictions, and some of these behaviors are actually illegal. Gambling is also one that is currently recognized in the DSM-5 as an addiction. Other types that we will cover in this lecture include internet and gaming and self-harm. And then in the next lecture, we will talk about love addiction and codependency. Although each process addiction has its own unique characteristics, they do have some general characteristics. The first is that they are typically legal activities. Think of eating, sex, shopping. Those are all legal activities. But when you add in the obsessive compulsive nature of an addiction, it becomes an actual dependency on them. However, there are some exceptions to process addictions being legal, like certain sexual behaviors are illegal, or things like shoplifting and stealing, which can become process addictions, are also illegal. As we stated already, they are compulsive or obsessive in nature. This is very similar to substance abuse addictions. They do provide the person with a sense of euphoria, and this is because some process addictions actually hijack the reward circuits and pleasure pathways in the brain very similarly to how chemical addictions do, which you learned about in the Pleasure Unwoven video. It's also very common for somebody with a substance abuse addiction to have a cross addiction or a co-occurring addiction with a process addiction. And this is quite common. Every person who is in recovery from drugs and alcohol may actually use other behaviors to cope with their problems in a maladaptive way. Other characteristics include a sense of control. Typically, a person who has a process addiction or behavior is trying to control something in their seemingly chaotic life. For example, if somebody has experienced trauma, it's not within their realm to control the trauma or how they feel about the trauma. So what is in their realm might be something like controlling their food consumption and weight gain. This may be a way to gain control over something when they feel very out of control in other parts of their life. Process addictions are oftentimes very hard to treat. Take drugs, for example. If you look at the 12 steps, the best way to treat this is to abstain from using the drugs. But what if you have an eating disorder? It's not as easy to just abstain from eating food. You're faced with that addiction and that trigger every single day, multiple times a day. As mentioned before, there is an obsessive compulsive component that is associated with process addictions. It involves similar brain processes that individuals with a substance abuse addiction go through. The brain will believe that they need to engage in this behavior in order to survive. People will ritualize and become preoccupied with the behavior and obsess over it until they actually engage in it. The brain will remember the tension and pain that was relieved when they participated in this behavior, and it will start to crave the next time they will be able to do that behavior. The first process addiction we will go over is self harm. In the DSM 5, this is actually listed as a non suicidal self injury, or NSSI. This is a deliberate, repetitive, impulsive, and non lethal way of harming one's body. The most common type of self-harm is cutting, and can be done with razors, knives, scissors, needles, broken glass, or whatever is available to them. However, there are other types of self-harm, including burning, scratching, banging your head against the wall, bruising yourself, pulling your hair. There are also many stereotypes that come with individuals who self-harm. These stereotypes include things like they only are women who self-harm, when that's actually not true. Men also a stereotype or an assumption that they have something like borderline disorder. People usually assume that somebody who is self-harming is actually seeking attention, but that's inaccurate in the fact that most of the time people who self-harm are hiding it from people. Another assumption is that individuals who self-harm are more interested in getting tattoos and piercings, when that's not really the case. And probably the biggest one is that individuals believe if you self-harm, then you're most likely trying to kill yourself, which the reason why it's in the DSM-5 is non-suicidal self-injury is most of the time people who are self-harming don't have the intention to kill themselves, they have the intention to feel the pain. So who is self-harming? Well, self-harmers actually represent about 4% of the population. And of course, that is only of what we are aware of and who's actually reporting it. Although self-harm is mostly reported by women of ages 13 to 30, all genders, ages, and people of different socioeconomic statuses engage in self-harming behaviors. The typical onset of self-harm behavior usually begins during puberty and can last anywhere between 5 to 10 years, and longer if it's untreated. Self-harm is non-suicidal, although there are some instances where individuals may self-harm and accidentally kill themselves. Those who are suicidal want to end the pain that they're experiencing. Self-harmers want to live their lives free of the pain they experience and gain a level of control in their lives. There comes in that control piece that's similar in process addictions. Although self-harm is sometimes visible, most of the time self-harmers hide their injuries. They usually do not want to be found out, mostly because they fear that somebody will try to take their means of control away. They may also be fearful of the stereotypes and stigmas that come with self-harmers. Over half of the self-harmers have experienced childhood trauma, whether it's sexual, physical, or emotional. 90% of self-harmers are usually discouraged from their family members of expressing their emotions. Those who self-harm typically also have low self-esteem and a low self-worth. They engage in self-harm in order to reduce the emotional pain by feeling physical pain. Some report that they are not able to feel emotional pain or express their emotions, but long to feel something when they self-harm. Self-harm, according to the current version of the DSM, is viewed as a symptom of borderline personality disorder. However, from an addiction perspective, it is viewed as an addictive behavior with similar processes as other addictions. There are people who self-harm who do not have a personality disorder. Because remember, a personality disorder is something that you will have the rest of your life. It's not something that just happens in a specific period of time. Self-harm actually fits really well with the process model of addiction, which we learned about in the theoretical models, in that the individual is using a maladaptive coping behavior, which ultimately leads to feelings of guilt and shame. This then triggers the cycle all over again for them experiencing pain and needing to use this coping behavior. The next type of addiction we'll go over is internet addiction. And this may seem weird to you, whereas our society is often enthralled with technology and the internet. It would devastate a lot of us if we didn't actually have internet anymore. In the DSM 5, this is not listed as a disorder, however, it is talked about as needing further study. Some researchers believe that the excessive use of social media does have an addictive nature to it. One study from Hazelton showed that those who excessively use social media were more inclined to be addicted to alcohol. Characteristics that might be indicative of an internet addiction would be a preoccupation with thought about using the internet, an increased amount of time spent online, despite efforts to stop, lying about the frequency or time of use, using in an attempt to cope with other things, and impacting relationships or people avoiding meaningful relationships to use the internet instead. So think about your social media use and how that might actually be playing an effect in your relationships, or are you spending more time on it despite efforts to stop? All of these things. Now let's look at gaming addiction. Again, this is one in the DSM 5 that is not listed as a disorder, but is talked about as needing further study. Typically, problematic gaming is associated with gaming for 18 hours or more in 1 week. People who are addicted to gaming usually would rather spend time gaming than spending time with other people. Video games today allow people to enter a fantasy world, even going as far as communicating with other gamers, creating avatars and representing themselves or who they wish to be, chatting online about gaming, and even having sex with an avatar created for the purpose of the game. In an attempt to not lose time playing the game, gamers will go as far as to set up stimulants to keep themselves awake or wear a diaper so they will not have to go to use the restroom. Here is a gaming assessment. Look at these questions and determine whether you might actually be bordering on a gaming addiction. How much time do you spend playing video games? Has your life been damaged in some way because of this? Has a relationship with someone been damaged? Does your school, job, or other activities suffer? Do you have any other mental health issues that seem to be getting worse because of during the video game playing? Is playing video games the most important thing in your life? And would you rather be playing video games than being with other people? Gambling addiction is another one that is listed in the DSM 5. It is becoming more prevalent, with over 7.5 million people in the US struggling with pathological gambling. The prevalence of gambling has increased due to its overall accessibility. The internet has allowed people to gamble from home and even from their smartphones. Casinos are actually everywhere, not just in Nevada. And bookies or sports betting, whether it's legal or not, is done in many cities. The economic cost of gambling is roughly about $5 billion a year. Pathological gambling can lead to criminal behavior, especially if someone loses excessive amounts of money and is in debt. Bookies and agencies may place bets of people who are not always able to pay back their debts. It can damage a relationship and families and sometimes leads to death. Death usually occurs when an individual cannot manage the consequences of gambling and significant financial loss dies from suicide. A national gambling impact study found that 7.9 million adolescents have become problem gamblers. As the reading talks about, there are 3 phases of gambling. The first one is the winning phase. This is when the gambler experiences that big win or a series of wins that leaves the gambler with a sense of optimism and euphoria. But they believe that they'll win every time, and they gamble, making it seem as if it would be ridiculous not to gamble. The excitement tends to lead to an increase of money spent, higher bets, and more frequent gambling. The next phase is a losing phase. This happens when the gambler will brag about their winnings, start gambling alone, and obsess about gambling, and then they begin to borrow money, legally or illegally, in order to satiate their need to gamble. They will start lying to their family and friends, and become more irritable, restless, and more withdrawn. Gamblers will become so determined to win back their losses by gambling more. They will experience difficulties at home, in their relationships, and will often have a considerable amount of debt. The last phase is the desperation phase, and this is marked by an increased time spent gambling. During this phase, gamblers will feel remorse, begin to blame others for their actions, and alienate themselves from family and friends. They may engage in illegal activities in order to finance their gambling or pay their bills. They may even develop substance related disorders in order to numb their pain. Emotional breakdowns or even suicide attempts are often experienced during this phase. There are two types of gambling. First is action, and then there's escape gambling. Action gambling is characterized by the thrill or the risk taking. These types of games usually include gambling with other people. Winning in this environment provides the gambler with a sense of pride and provides the gambler with, and they can identify themselves as a winner. Men are usually more action gamblers, although women can too. This action becomes the drug similar to a substance related addiction when the addict has the drug of choice. Escape gambling is often preferred by women, although some men also engage in it. This type of gambling is usually associated with slot machines, when an individual can isolate themselves for hours on end and methodically click buttons or pull handles. These type of gamblers are often looking for the escape from their feelings or an emotional crisis. The rhythmic motions of these types of games provide a numbing effect and provide a place where they can avoid human contact. With all of these addictions, there are maladaptive patterns, ways of thinking. The thoughts are distortions. Some thought distortions characterized by gambling include personification of the machine, where people start to view an inanimate object as something personal. It has meaning and they've developed a false relationship with it. Another thought distortion is the illusion of control. Similarly to other process addictions, it is developed and the gamblers believe that they have control over the situation. But they believe they are choosing to gamble and can manage the situation. Statistically, this is impossible though. Flexible attribution is associated with superstitions around gambling. They believe that in near wins, they think that they are closer to winning big. They will contribute losses to a fluke and not see an improbability. Also, availability bias is when an individual judges the probability to win. They will see people winning around them and believe that machines are going to pay out. They will thrive on the excitement that they see from other winnings at the table and believe that they can do the same. They will also fixate on the absolute frequency. They will win a lot because they put in a lot of money, but in reality, they hyper-focus on the wins and forget that they've lost more than they've won. So these are the first process addictions we'll go over, and in the next lecture, we will talk about the other process addictions. Thank you.